The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 14-year-old Samantha Chen stood at the Family Feud podium with a question in her eyes that went far deeper than any survey answer could address. When Steve Harvey asked about things that make family complicated, Samantha's response, "Having two mothers who both love you," carried the weight of a young girl caught between two worlds, two women, and two very different definitions of what it meant to be family. Samantha had been adopted as an infant by David and Linda Chen, a loving couple who had struggled with infertility for years before deciding that their hearts were big enough to love a child who needed them regardless of biology. They had raised Samantha with complete honesty about her adoption, celebrating her birth mother's courage while making it clear that she was their daughter in every way that mattered. For 14 years, their family had been complete, happy, and secure. The adoption had been arranged through a reputable agency in California, with Jessica Martinez, Samantha's birth mother, choosing the Chens from dozens of profiles because something about their letter had spoken to her teenage heart. David Chen, a high school science teacher, and Linda Chen, a pediatric nurse, had written about their dreams of bedtime stories, science fair projects, and unconditional love. Jessica had been 17, pregnant, and terrified, but she had been determined to give her daughter the kind of stable, loving home that she couldn't provide at that stage of her life. The Chens had been present at Samantha's birth, cutting the umbilical cord and holding her within minutes of her arrival in the world. Jessica had held Samantha for 2 hours, whispering promises and apologies and hopes into her tiny ears, before placing her into Linda's arms with a courage that had left everyone in the delivery room in tears. It had been an open adoption, with letters and photos exchanged through the agency for the first few years, but as Jessica had gotten older and moved away for college, the communication had gradually faded. But 6 months ago, everything had changed when Samantha's birth mother, Jessica Martinez, had reached out through the adoption agency. Jessica had been 17 when she gave birth to Samantha, a frightened teenager who had made the most difficult decision of her life because she wanted her daughter to have opportunities she couldn't provide. Now, at 31, Jessica was married, financially stable, and desperate to meet the daughter she had never stopped thinking about. Jessica's path to this moment had been long and complicated. After placing Samantha for adoption, she had thrown herself into her education, earning a scholarship to UCLA, and eventually becoming a social worker who specialized in helping young mothers navigate difficult decisions. She had married a kind man who understood her history and supported her desire to reconnect with Samantha. They had 2 young children together, and Jessica often found herself looking at her sons and wondering about the daughter she had placed with another family. The decision to reach out had taken Jessica months of therapy, consultation with counselors, and careful consideration of everyone's well-being. She didn't want to disrupt Samantha's life or threaten the Chen's family stability. She simply wanted Samantha to know that she was loved, that her birth had been celebrated, and that the decision to place her for adoption had been made from a place of love rather than rejection. The decision to reconnect had been agonizing for everyone involved. The Chens had always been open to the possibility, but the reality was more complex than anyone had anticipated. Samantha found herself torn between loyalty to the parents who had raised her and curiosity about the woman who had given her life. Linda Chen struggled with fears that she might lose her daughter's love to the woman who had given birth to her. David Chen worried about protecting his family while doing what was best for Samantha. The family had spent months in counseling, working through their fears and expectations with a therapist who specialized in adoption reunification. Samantha had written lists of questions she wanted to ask Jessica, had stared at the few baby photos she had from her birth, and had struggled with feelings that ranged from excitement to resentment to curiosity. Why had Jessica waited so long to reach out? What did she want from this relationship? Was she expecting Samantha to fill a void in her life that her other children couldn't fill? Linda Chen had her own complex emotions to navigate. She had always known this day might come, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. She loved Samantha fiercely and had never doubted that Samantha was her daughter in every way that mattered. But she also understood that Samantha's curiosity about her origins was natural and healthy, and she didn't want her own fears to complicate her daughter's journey of self-discovery. And Jessica Martinez carried the weight of 14 years of wondering, hoping, and praying that her daughter was happy and loved, while battling the guilt of wanting to reclaim a relationship she had voluntarily given up. The Family Feud appearance had been planned as a celebration of the Chen family, a fun experience that would create positive memories during what had been a difficult and emotionally complex time. But unbeknownst to Samantha, the show's producers had been contacted by Jessica Martinez, who had seen the family's upcoming appearance announced in their local newspaper and had reached out with a request that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. She wanted to meet her daughter, and she thought that perhaps a neutral, supportive environment like Family Feud might be the perfect place for their first face-to-face meeting. The producers had worked with both families, the adoption agency, and family counselors to determine whether such a meeting would be appropriate and beneficial for everyone involved, especially for Samantha. The process had taken weeks of careful coordination. Jessica had flown to Los Angeles the day before the taping, staying in a hotel and fighting nerves that kept her awake all night. She had brought photo albums showing Samantha's birth and the early days, letters she had written but never sent over the years, and small gifts she had purchased but never had the opportunity to give. Most importantly, she had brought a letter explaining her decision to place Samantha for adoption and expressing her gratitude to the Chens for giving their daughter the life she had wanted her to have. Now, standing at the podium, Samantha was unaware that her birth mother was waiting in a room just off the studio, as nervous and hopeful as any mother about to meet her child for the first time. The game had been proceeding normally until that moment. The Chen family was competing against the Rodriguez family from Texas, and both sides had been playing with enthusiasm and good humor. Samantha's adoptive parents had been providing solid answers. Her younger brother, also adopted, had been cheering enthusiastically, and the atmosphere had been exactly what you'd expect from a wholesome family game show. Samantha had been enjoying the experience, reveling in the bright lights and excitement of being on television with her family. She had always been close to her parents and younger brother, and she loved seeing them in their element, laughing and competing and being themselves. But as the game progressed, she found her mind wandering to thoughts of Jessica, to the upcoming meeting they had tentatively planned, to all the questions and emotions she had been carrying for months. But when it was Samantha's turn at the buzzer for the category Things That Make Family Complicated, the weight of her current situation had overwhelmed her ability to give a typical game show response. Things that make family complicated, Steve Harvey had announced with his usual warm energy. What complicates family life, Samantha? Samantha had looked at her adoptive parents, then at Steve, and when she spoke, her voice carried a maturity beyond her 14 years. Having two mothers who both love you, she had said quietly, her words making the studio audience fall silent as they sensed they were hearing something deeply personal. Steve had paused, his entertainer's instincts telling him that something significant was happening. Two mothers who both love you, Steve had repeated thoughtfully. That sounds like a blessing and a challenge at the same time. Can you tell me more about that? Samantha had hesitated, glancing at her adoptive parents, who nodded encouragingly. I'm adopted, Samantha had said, her voice stronger now. My parents, Mom and Dad Chen, they're amazing. They've given me everything, loved me completely, raised me to be who I am. But recently, my birth mother reached out. She wants to meet me. And I want to meet her too, but I'm scared. What are you scared of? Steve had asked gently, approaching the podium with the kind of careful attention he reserved for moments that transcended entertainment. I'm scared that if I love her, it means I love my real parents less, Samantha had said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm scared that she'll think I should be different than I am. I'm scared that wanting to know her makes me ungrateful to the people who chose me and raised me. The confession had hung in the air like a weight. Everyone in the studio had understood that they were witnessing a young girl's struggle with one of the most complex emotional situations imaginable. Steve had set down his cards and approached Samantha directly. Samantha, he had said, his voice gentle but firm, can I tell you something about love? She had nodded, looking at him with complete trust. Love isn't like a pie, where giving someone a piece means there's less for everyone else. Love is like a candle. When you use one candle to light another, the first candle doesn't get dimmer, it just means there's more light in the world. Steve had glanced at Linda and David Chen, who were watching with expressions that mixed pride in their daughter with their own complex emotions about the situation. Your parents, Steve had continued, gesturing toward the Chens, they didn't just adopt a baby 14 years ago. They chose to love completely, without reservation, without fear. And part of that love means understanding that you're curious about where you came from. That doesn't threaten their love, it honors it. Samantha had wiped her eyes, but more tears kept coming. But what if she doesn't like who I've become? Samantha had asked. What if I'm not what she hoped for? What if she is exactly what she hoped for? Steve had said, which is a daughter who was loved so completely that she grew up kind, thoughtful, and brave enough to ask hard questions about love and family. Steve had looked around the studio, then made a decision that would define not just that episode, but everyone's understanding of what family could look like. Samantha, Steve had said, Sometimes life gives us opportunities to expand our definition of family. Sometimes we get to discover that there's room for more love, not less. And sometimes those opportunities come when we least expect them. Steve had turned toward the studio entrance, and the doors had opened to reveal Jessica Martinez, a petite woman with dark hair and Samantha's eyes, carrying flowers and looking terrified but hopeful. The moment Samantha saw her, her face had gone completely white. She had stared at Jessica with the kind of recognition that goes beyond memory to something deeper and more primal. "Samantha," Steve had said softly, "I'd like you to meet someone who has been thinking about you every day for 14 years. Jessica had approached slowly, her own tears flowing freely as she took in her daughter's face, her height, the young woman she had become. "Hi, baby," Jessica had whispered when she reached Samantha. "You're so beautiful. You're so much more than I ever dreamed." Samantha had looked at Jessica, then back at her adoptive parents, who were both crying and nodding encouragingly. "I don't know what to say," Samantha had admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Jessica had replied. "I just wanted you to know that giving you to your parents wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you so much that I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. And look at you, you're perfect." Steve had gestured for Linda Chen to join them, and she had approached with the grace of someone who understood that love multiplies rather than divides. "Jessica," Linda had said, extending her hand, "thank you for the most precious gift we could ever receive. Thank you for trusting us with her." Jessica had taken Linda's hand, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with gratitude rather than competition. "Thank you for loving her the way she deserved to be loved. Thank you for giving her everything I wanted her to have." Steve had watched this extraordinary exchange and then addressed the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen," he had announced, "what we're witnessing here is something beautiful and rare. This is what happens when people choose love over fear, abundance over scarcity, inclusion over exclusion." He had looked at Samantha, who was standing between her two mothers with wonder rather than confusion. "Samantha, you asked what complicates family, but I think what you've got here isn't complicated, it's complete. You have parents who chose you and raised you. You have a birth mother who loved you enough to make sure you had the best life possible. And now you have the chance to know all the love that created you." Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping. "This jacket represents something special today," Steve had said, draping it around all three women, Samantha, Linda, and Jessica. "It represents the understanding that family isn't about blood or law or tradition. Family is about love, choice, and the courage to expand our hearts when life gives us the chance." Samantha had looked up at Steve with eyes that were clearer than they had been when the conversation started. "So I don't have to choose?" she had asked. "You don't have to choose between mothers," Steve had replied. "You get to choose to be loved by as many people as are willing to love you. You get to choose gratitude for the woman who gave you life and the parents who gave you everything else. You get to choose to let your heart be big enough for all the love that's being offered." Jessica had spoken directly to Samantha for the first time. "I don't want to complicate your life," she had said. "I just wanted you to know that you were wanted, that you were loved, and that not a day has gone by that I haven't wondered if you were happy." "I am happy," Samantha had replied, looking at her adoptive parents and then back at Jessica. "I'm loved, I'm safe, I have everything you wanted me to have." "Then I can be at peace," Jessica had said simply. The game had resumed, but it had been transformed. Both families played together, and Jessica had been invited to join the Chen family team. When Steve asked the final question about things that make you grateful, Samantha had looked at both her mothers and answered simply, "Having enough love to go around." The studio had erupted in applause that seemed to last forever, celebrating not just a game show victory, but a triumph of love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and the expansion of family beyond traditional boundaries. The episode had ended with all three women wearing Steve's jacket together, with David Chen taking photos, with Jessica and Linda making plans to stay in touch, and with Samantha understanding that she didn't have to choose between her mothers, she could love them both for the different gifts they had given her. After the cameras stopped rolling, the three women had spent an hour talking in Steve's dressing room. Jessica had shared the photo albums and letters she had brought, showing Samantha pictures of the day she was born and the early moments they had shared. Linda had shared stories of Samantha's childhood, her first words, her first steps, her academic achievements, and her dreams for the future. Samantha had asked the questions she had been carrying for months, learning about Jessica's life, her other children, and her decision-making process years earlier. The conversation had been emotional but healing for everyone involved. Jessica had been able to see that her decision to place Samantha for adoption had resulted in exactly what she had hoped for, a daughter who was loved, confident, and thriving. Linda had been able to understand that Jessica's desire to reconnect came from love rather than regret, and that supporting this relationship was part of loving Samantha completely. Samantha had been able to understand that both her mothers had made difficult decisions out of love for her, and that she was worthy of all the care and sacrifice they had offered. The episode aired 2 months later and sparked a national conversation about adoption, birth-parent rights, and the complexity of modern family structures. Adoption agencies reported increased interest from both prospective parents and birth mothers who had been considering reunification. Samantha had kept Steve's jacket as a reminder that love multiplies rather than divides. She had developed relationships with both her adoptive parents and her birth mother, understanding that each relationship offered something unique and valuable. Jessica had become not a replacement for Linda Chen, but an addition to Samantha's family constellation. Linda and David Chen had discovered that opening their hearts to Jessica didn't threaten their relationship with Samantha, but strengthened it, showing her that they loved her enough to support all her relationships, even the complicated ones. Jessica Martinez had found peace in knowing that her daughter was exactly who she had hoped she would become, loved, confident, and surrounded by people who would support her through anything. Steve Harvey had learned something profound about the nature of family and love, that the best families are those that expand to include everyone who offers genuine care and support, and that love is indeed like light. The more you share it, the brighter the world becomes. The jacket that Steve had shared with all 3 women became a symbol in their family of inclusion, acceptance, and the understanding that some of life's greatest gifts come in unexpected packages, through difficult decisions, and from the courage to love without limits. Because that's what family looks like when it chooses abundance over scarcity. That's what love sounds like when it refuses to be confined by traditional boundaries. And that's what happens when a 14-year-old girl learns that having 2 mothers isn't a complication, it's a blessing that proves love multiplies rather than divides, and that the heart has infinite capacity for all the people who choose to care.